Hey everyone, welcome back. Last episode laid out the map that I will be covering. 8 different systems in the body that can go wrong after COVID. Immune problems, viruses that never fully clears, old dormant viruses waking up, autoimmunity, tiny clots, a nervous system that can't regulate itself, mitochondria, and last but not least, gut bacteria. 8 boxes on the board, and the point of that episode was that different people are probably living in different boxes, which is why long COVID looks so different from one person to the next. Today, we go into box number 1, and we stay there. The immune system, and not even the whole immune system, just one single cell type inside it. Here's the idea I want to land today, and I'll say it up front so you know where this is going. Some of the immune cells in long COVID patients did not lose the fight against COVID. They just never got to stop fighting. And a cell that never gets to stop fighting does not stay sharp. It wears down. The worn down state has an actual name in immunology. It's called exhaustion. And it is not a metaphor. It's a specific, measurable thing that happens to a cell. And by the end of this episode, you'll know how researchers spot it and why it might explain why you feel the way you feel. So let's get started. What a killer T cell actually is. Before going any further, everyone needs the same picture in their head. So let me build it. Your immune system is not one thing. It's a team of specialists, and each specialist does a different job. Today is about one of them, the killer T cells. Scientists call it a CD8 T cell. You'll hear both names, killer T cell, CD8 T cell, same thing. Its job is exactly what the name says. It patrols your body looking for your own cells that have been hijacked by a virus, and when it finds one, it destroys it. That's the whole job. Find the infected cell, kill it, move on. Now, here's the part that matters most today, and I'm going to repeat it a few times because everything else depends on it. Killer T cells are not general purpose soldiers. Each one is trained on one specific target and one only. So you don't have a single killer T cell army. You have many separate armies, one per infection. You have an army trained on COVID. You have a completely different army trained on the virus that causes mono, which scientists call EBV, or Epstein-Barr virus. You have another separate army trained on a virus called CMV, which most people have never heard of, even though about half of us are quietly carrying it for life. Different armies, different targets, they don't cover for each other. Hold on to that because it's going to matter enormously in the next few episodes. And there's one more piece of normal biology to know. After an infection is cleared, these armies are supposed to stand down. Most of these cells die off. A few stick around as memory cells, quietly filed away, in case that same virus ever shows up again. But the aggressive, actively killing behavior is supposed to switch off. The winding down is not the immune system giving up. The winding down is part of the job. Today is about what happens when that part of the job doesn't get done. What exhaustion actually is. So, picture an army that's been ordered into the field and never given the order to come home. The fight doesn't end. There's always something to respond to, week after week, month after month. What happens to those cells is not what most people picture when they hear the word exhausted. This isn't tiredness you sleep off. It's closer to a cell being slowly reprogrammed by the job it can't stop doing. The cell is still there, it still shows up. If you drew someone's blood and counted, you'd find it, but its actual firepower drops. And it drops in a specific order, which is one of the reasons researchers are confident this is a real, organized process and not just random damage. The first thing to go is the cell's ability to multiply and to shout. Killer T cells normally release signaling molecules that call in reinforcements, and they normally clone themselves rapidly when there's work to do. Those abilities fade first. The actual killing power fades later. So you can end up with a cell that looks present on paper and still has some of its weapons, but has largely lost its voice and its ability to bring in backup. Researchers can spot this state by looking at the surface of the cell. Cells carry little protein flags on the outside, and certain flags go up when a cell has drifted into exhaustion. The names you'll see are PD1 and TIM3. Quick heads up before we go further. These flags aren't an exhaustion only signal. A cell that's simply working hard can carry them too, and we'll come back to that wrinkle in a few minutes. But for now, just know that PD1 and TIM3 can also signal exhausted cells. Don't worry about memorizing those names. Just know that they're real, measurable markers, and that this is why exhaustion is a diagnosis a lab can make rather than a vibe someone describes. But here's what those flags actually are. And this is the part I find genuinely elegant. They're brakes. The cell is putting its own brakes on. That's not a malfunction. That's a safety system. When an immune response drags on for a long time, there's a real danger that all that killing starts damaging healthy tissue. So the body has a built in mechanism to throttle its own soldiers during a long fight. Exhaustion is that safety brake, held down for so long that it stops being a temporary setting and starts being the cell's identity. Which leads to the single most useful thing to take away from today. If someone's killer T cells are exhausted, that tells you something important about what's happening in their body right now. Exhaustion doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's caused by a cell being exposed to a threat over and over without a break. So finding exhausted cells months after an infection raises an obvious and uncomfortable question. Exposed to what? Exposed to something still this long afterward? Sit with that question, because the rest of this series is largely about trying to answer it. What does the data actually say? The clearest work on this comes out of Sydney, where a team took a group of people who had long COVID and a matched group who had the same infection and recovered fine, and then followed both of them for 2 years. Same people, blood drawn again and again over the whole stretch. So they weren't guessing from a single snapshot. And what they found is that in the long COVID group, those break markers, the PD1 and TIM3 I mentioned a minute ago, were elevated at 3 months, still elevated at 8 months. In the people who recovered, they were not. Sit with this timeline on for a second. 8 months. This is not a flare during illness. Those are people who were told infection was over most of a year earlier, and their immune cells are still carrying the signature of a fight. So the finding is real, and here's what it means. In at least some long COVID patients, the immune system did not simply go back to normal when the infection cleared. Something is still going on down at the level of the individual cell, long after everyone stopped looking. Now, the honest caveat, And I'm putting it here rather than earlier because I wanted you to understand why the finding matters first. What this shows is a correlation. People with persistent symptoms tend to have more of these markers. This is not the same as proving the exhausted cells are causing the symptoms. It is entirely possible the exhaustion is a downstream consequence of something else that's driving both. That's not me hedging for the sake of hedging. It genuinely changes what you do about it, and anyone selling you a fix that assumes causation is getting ahead of the data. The debate the field is actually having. There's a second caveat, and this one is a live argument among immunologists rather than a settled point. Remember those flags on the cell surface, PD1 and the others? Here's the problem. Those same flags also go up on a T cell that was simply activated recently. A BC cell doing its job well under heavy load can carry the same markers as a worn out cell that's lost its edge. So when a researcher finds a lot of flag cells, there's a real question about what they're actually looking at. Genuinely exhausted cells or a snapshot of cells that are just extremely busy? Telling those apart properly means testing what the cells can actually do, not just what flags they're wearing. And that's harder and more expensive work. The field is honestly split on this. And I'd rather tell you that than pretend it's cleaner than it is. And one more thing, because I know a lot of you are listening to this personally and not academically. And I don't want to leave you sitting in the worst part of it. Remember that Sydney group followed people for 2 years? I told you the markers were up at 3 months and still up at 8. Here's the part I held back there. When they went and looked again at 24 months, the difference was gone. The long COVID group no longer stood apart from the recovered group on those markers. Now be careful with that because it does not mean everyone gets better. And it does not mean feeling better tracks neatly with the blood work. It also doesn't settle the argument in the other direction. Someone could look at this and say, well, if the marker's gone by 2 years, maybe it was never that important to begin with. Just a flare that came and went. But that's not the only honest reading either. It's entirely possible that for at least some people, having those cells run exhausted for months created systemic changes that outlasted the exhaustion itself. Changes that could show up later as ongoing long COVID symptoms, even once the original marker has quietly normalized. Neither story is proven, but I don't think the marker disappearing means the story is over. So, here's where to leave it today. Exhaustion is not the absence of immune cells. It's the presence of immune cells that are underpowered, which might be part of why so many people get told their blood work looks fine while they feel anything but fine. A standard test counts whether the cells are there. It doesn't ask whether they still work. But if you're listening closely, you might have caught a loose thread. I said exhausted cells lose their ability to call for backup first, and their killing power later. Which raises a question. What would it mean if researchers found cells that looked exhausted by every marker they had and were still armed and actively killing anyway? That's next episode, because that's exactly what one team found, and it's one of the strangest results in long COVID research this year. See you next time.